So to wake myself up today, I thought I'd talk about the first political news or item that I saw, which happened today to be pro-trans rights open letter from the good people at Liberal Democrats, or Liberal Democrat women to be precise. Now, this is coffee o'clock for me, so if there's weird slurping noises in the background, I assure you that's what it is. Anyway, I thought I'd talk about this letter here that's up on screen. Um, because the trans debate's an interesting one. It's something that doesn't really have an impact on almost anybody's day-to-day life. I mean, how many trans people do you know? But it's interesting because of how people sort of tie themselves into knots trying to talk about the issue. Very often I find that they essentially don't talk about the issue. They'll say things like, well, trans rights are human rights, and don't be mean to trans people, which is very nice sentiment, of course. But then when you actually look into what they're saying, it's nothing that actually helps you with a debate or with a practical scenario. Just to give an example of the sort of scenario that could crop up and why we might want to hear from politicians. Imagine, for instance, there's a women's refuge, so somewhere where women who've really not had a nice time, perhaps suffering some sort of domestic abuse, um, they've gone and they've got some shelter and they've been able to sort of get back on their feet. Many of the women in these sort of places, I can imagine, most certainly don't want to be around men, possibly because of particularly unpleasant experiences they've had. So if a trans person, that is someone who's actually born male who now identifies as female, if they want to go to one of these women's refuges, should they be allowed to? Now, some people might think this is really simple and just say simply yes. They are women in some real meaningful sense. They should get the same protection. Some may say the opposite. They may say no. Well, this is a refuge for women. They don't want some big hairy chap there, and they should have that right to have a women-only space. So how do we decide? I mean, personally, I think there has to be a simple middle ground. I mean, let's imagine two potential attendees at this refuge. You've got, let's say, someone who was born with some sort of intersex kind of characteristics. So, example of that might just be simply like an hermaphrodite. Let's say someone who, to all intents and purposes, looks very much like a woman. Maybe they were told by the doctors, you're more man than you are woman, but they've lived their life as a woman. The women in the refuge possibly wouldn't even notice that they weren't really a woman, if I can say that on something like YouTube and not get in trouble. I'm not passing any kind of judgment there, I'm just trying to sort of explain this scenario. But if they were passing, which again I understand is a phrase I'm not really supposed to use, but you know what I mean, that would probably be acceptable for most people, I would think. But how about another example? Let's say Big Frank, who is 6'9", absolutely massive, a big hairy bloke, as far as we can tell, with our bigoted judging minds. But Big Frank says, well, actually, I'm a woman, and I want to go to this refuge because I've had genuine problems. I really have. But I don't want to go to the male one because I don't know reasons. Maybe Big Frank, or what did I just call this guy? Did I call this guy Frank? Another big chap. He's there, and I don't want to be there. If your approach to trans rights is simply, well, yes, sure, of course, this person identifies as a woman, so should be able to go there, then well, are you not going to introduce any safeguards to that? I mean, you must be. You must be talking about only genuine trans people. But then how do we distinguish between genuine and non-genuine cases? And another politics of the situation is who does? Is that up for the refuge to decide, or should there become some kind of law? So very quickly we get into some quite complicated issues, and I think it's always interesting to see how politicians would respond to that, and if they're in government, what sort of rules would they introduce? So with that in mind, let's get on to this letter. Let's see how helpful it is. So, the following is an open letter of support written by April Preston. We at Lib Dem Women are displaying it here as a statement of our own support for trans rights. Click here to add your name. Let's see if I'm going to add my name. Right, pro trans rights open letter. As women and liberals, we wish to make it clear that we do not believe there's any conflict between women's rights and trans rights. Well, already that's an interesting statement. I mean, look at our example that we just gave. We would say that women have a right to these refuges, to have essentially women-only spaces, well, for good reasons. But we're also saying that potentially trans people have the right to use these. So there is a conflict there. Now, you can resolve that conflict quite simply. You can just say, well, we don't respect the right of women to have women-only spaces. If you don't respect that right, then there's no conflict between women's other rights and trans people's rights to enter those places. Or you can do the opposite. You can say, well, trans people do not have the right to enter these spaces. So if I'm born male but I identify as as a woman, I do not have the right to then go into a women-only space. You know, I'm not saying that's the right, either of those are the right answer, but if you don't think there's a conflict between either set of rights, then you have to deny that one of them is actually a right. You can't say, yes, women should have women-only spaces, and yes, trans women should be able to enter those spaces. I mean, when I say women-only spaces, I mean spaces that are only accessible to people that those women consider women. So anyway, we're already getting complicated, so I'll try and move this on and not make an hour-long video like I did last time. Anyway, so let's see how they're going to resolve this. In light of the ongoing campaigns against trans people, I'm not aware of any of those. I would Google it, but again, let's make this short. Let's assume those exist. We want to reassert our strength of feeling, which is in line with Liberal Democrat policy. Ooh, another thing I can look up. That trans rights are indeed human rights. Okay? We would reiterate that Liberal Democrats are committed, and have been every time the matter has come before conference, to supporting trans rights. Since 2015, it's been the party's agreed position that, right, here we go, here comes the content. Variations in sex and gender, however they manifest, are a simple fact, don't think they're simple, of human physiology and psychology, and neither the state nor society should pass judgment on people who deviate from what is considered the norm. Oh, grief. I mean, pass judgment is a... If I use the word, I'm going to use it. Problematic phrase. I mean, when we say pass judgment, I think we often don't mean you shouldn't pass judgment. We mean that you shouldn't be too judgmental. So, you know, if I come into work looking a little bit worse for wear, oh, you shouldn't pass judgment. You don't know what they've gone through, which means you shouldn't. That doesn't mean you shouldn't come to a judgment about what's happened. It means that you shouldn't be overly judgmental. So let's try and apply that. We shouldn't be overly judgmental about the fact that there are variations in sex and gender. Okay, that's somewhat meaningless, isn't it? I mean, it seems to equate to just don't be too mean to people. Or, of course, we can just take it literally and say, well, you should never use variations in human psychology or physiology to judge people. Well, okay, well, let's have a look at some simple examples. What if my physiological difference is that, what's a disability? Something that means I can't go out to work. Should I not be judged more worthy of some extra assistance? Or psychological differences, maybe I've got severe depression. Should we not pass judgment on that? I mean, again, we know what they mean, but I shouldn't make a moral judgment about you. I shouldn't say you're a bad person because of your psychological difference. Because you're depressed, you're awful. What they mean is that, you know, I shouldn't be considered a bad person. I mean, I think we can obviously think of some possible exceptions. What if I'm psychologically attracted to children? There's a thing I didn't want to say on YouTube, but you know, in this instance, if I were, should people pass judgment on me? I think probably yes, but to what extent? Anyway, this is getting far too philosophical. Let's move on. Let's just say that essentially says don't be too judgmental. Okay. It is irresponsible at best and malicious at worst, comma, for some reason, to refuse marginalised people such as the transgender community the right to organise or access sheltered accommodation. Oh, sheltered accommodation. That's like a refuge that I was just talking about. So we shouldn't stop people, marginalised people, such as the transgender community, as if they all live in one little town, the transgender community. Transgender people, I think you mean. We shouldn't refuse them the right to organise. I mean, who's going around saying, no transgender club? It just seems a strange thing to be against. Access sheltered accommodation. Right, okay, so I think we have an answer to our question. If Big Frank wants to go into that refuge, he should be able to. But again, they're probably talking about genuine transgender people. I mean, so let's work out. Let's see. Let's mark that. Hopefully, we'll get to a point in this somewhere where we have an idea of how we determine if someone is actually genuine. Moving on, every person has a right to receive prompt medical care that is free at the point of service. Rights are always an interesting one, because how are you conceiving of rights here? Without going all through the sort of the political theory traditions. So vague sketch here. You've got the idea of natural rights. So if there were no society, no government, everything pressuring and making things complicated, would I have the right to prompt medical care? Well, no, because that would be a right to someone else doing something, a right to someone else's labour, which I would not have were it not for the society in which we live. So a moral right, is that what you mean? Some sort of moral right, some God-given right, or some sort of logically just right. I think that has to be the argument. So in other words, it is morally right that we provide medical care that is free at the point of service. Well, there's legal rights, which is essentially true here, that yes, in the UK you have a legal right to medical care free at point of service. That is what our health system does. So what are you saying? That you want to maintain that? I mean, in the context of trans rights, you're presumably saying that trans people deserve medical care free at the point of service. Okay, just as anyone else does, or presumably you are hinting at care specific to trans people? I don't know, again, it doesn't really say very much. Next, no person, especially no child, should be made to undergo unnecessary medical treatment without their informed consent. Yes, obviously. So what are we getting at here? So if little Jimmy, age 6, says, actually, I'm not male, mum and daddy, I'd like some surgery to become a woman, we're going to say, well, no, you haven't got informed consent because you're 6. So that sounds like a sensible safeguard. I mean, we can obviously disagree as to exactly what informed consent looks like. How old, how informed do I have to be? Do I read a pamphlet? Do I get medical advice from multiple doctors? What's involved in that process? But yeah, okay, fair principle. Number 5, we have a responsibility as liberals to represent and liberate, blimey, the most marginalised people in society. I mean, as a liberal, you believe in the idea that people should be free to do whatever they want as long as they don't infringe upon the rights of others. So it's a liberty-loving ideology, so I can get that. Liberate people, I mean, that's a bit dramatic. I don't know who's in need of liberation. I mean, who's being oppressed. Represent the most marginalised people in society. I mean, a liberal should not really represent. A liberal should care about the rights of every individual. If you've got a section of society whose rights are not being respected, then yes, a liberal should jump up and say, right, we need to do something about this. If someone's marginalised, what does that mean? That they're not being given due attention? Is there a right to attention? I think that's a difficult one. If say liberals are concerned with rights and freedoms, if those rights and freedoms are being threatened, then yeah, liberals sleep in. Marginalised, if someone's not feeling part of society, I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything about that, I'm just saying as a liberal, why would a liberal be interested in marginalised people in society specifically? I don't know, I think I think what they probably mean is we have a responsibility as liberals to represent and assist those whose rights and freedoms are at threat, and just as nice people, we would like to also look at the most marginalised people in society. Again, that's probably not an important distinction by any stretch of the imagination. But okay, we've got some outline principles. I'm not sure how in our imagined scenario the Liberal Democrats would respond as yet. I'm thinking we probably have some sort of test of whether Big Frank is really a woman or a trans woman, whatever that might look like, and we probably would let him in. Her in to the into the refuge. But let's see. Right. Moreover, the party recently adopted a definition of transphobia, which states that requiring trans people to be separate from society, using segregated facilities or denying them access to facilities, or advocating the withdrawal or defunding of access to transition-related medical treatment for trans people are transphobic actions. Grief, there's a lot there. So, phobia, or any kind of phobia, is obviously a bit of a, I'm going to do it again, problematic type of term. I mean, obviously, if we talk about phobia, we mean a persistent and irrational fear. We mean something that almost needs to be treated. But the terms used in other forms, like transphobia, homophobia, it doesn't really mean that, does it? Or Islamophobia. It's used to describe some sort of dislike of the thing, or people in question, that we think is unreasonable. So people we call homophobes aren't those who leap into the bushes in terror when they see a gay person. They're someone that we believe is acting in some kind of irrational or bigoted way towards them. So let's bear that one in mind. It is irrational and unpleasant of you to require trans people to be separate from society. Yeah? I mean, I don't think anyone's saying put them in camps or send them out into the wilderness, but I know what they mean, that they're saying excluding these people in some way. Okay, no, fine, that's probably unreasonable. Using segregated facilities. I mean, what does that mean? Putting the men in one, the women in one room, and the trans people in another? The male to female in one, the female to male in another? I'm not sure. Denying them access facilities. So again, here we are. Big Frank wants to go to the women's refuge. Denying her access to the facilities is transphobic. Okay, well, a lot is relying on this notion of what is really trans now, isn't it? So, okay, well, I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. Advocating the withdrawal or defunding of access to transition-related medical treatment for trans people. Good grief. So if I say, well, Big Frank wants to get some kind of medical treatment to get rid of all his hair, I don't think the NHS should pay for that. That's transphobic of me. Yeesh. I mean, that sort of seems to assume that any kind of medical treatment that a trans person might ask for that is genuinely related to, as it says, it is transition related, is essential, and me saying, well, I don't think we should actually be paying for that would be transphobic of me. Great, that seems a little harsh. But again, we're back down to this genuine case. Have I got a genuine conviction that Big Frank is actually a woman, or should be treated as such, or should transition? Has this person had, what did we say? Have they got properly informed consent to proceed with this? I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. I think there's room for healthy disagreement about what should and shouldn't be funded. I think I resent a little bit being told that it's transphobic to disagree on that. Anyway, any suggestion that trans women be segregated or restricted on the basis of their trans identity is a transphobic one. Okay, segregated? I mean, I don't know what that looks like in practical terms. I mean, yes, we shouldn't ship them off to their own little community somewhere. Restricted. Well, again, we keep coming back to the same thing. If someone who is born one sex but now says they're the other wants to go into a place that is usually a space only reserved for the sex of which they are transitioning into, or I don't know if we say they've already transitioned, I don't know what the lingo is, that they should be allowed to. Well, again, there's a question. If Big Frank has only this morning decided that Big Frank is trans, does Big Frank get to go to the women's refuge, or do we have to wait till surgery's done? I don't know. I mean, if I fall on the wrong side of this debate with the Liberal Democrat women, am I transphobic? I mean, here's a worst example for them. If I say, well, 17-year-old who wants to transition, if I say they're not actually informed, they're not 18 yet, they can't make that decision, they haven't gone to the right doctors, I don't consider them trans, no, they can't go to this women's refuge, are the Liberal Democrats going to call me transphobic? Because I've used their own principle here of requiring informed consent. Or are they are trans, but they just haven't proceeded with the surgeries and medical attention yet? I don't know. I feel that they're playing with fire here. If you're just going to say, right, no, if you disagree with us, you're transphobic, but at the same time you're not going to actually tell us exactly how we distinguish a genuine trans person, you could quite easily find people that agree with everything you've said up until the transphobic thing, or maybe including the transphobic thing, but then still get branded transphobic because they don't agree with you. I think that's dangerous. Regarding single-sex spaces, we maintain that any individual, cis or trans, who commits acts which harm others can be dealt with under existing laws and policies. Well, yeah. So if Big Frank goes into the women's refuge and hits somebody, then they should be dealt with under existing laws and policies. I don't think anyone disputes that. It doesn't solve the issue, does it? At all. No. No one's saying that if a trans person commits some sort of crime, they should be subject to a different law. We're saying that, or say we're saying the other side of the debate in this is saying that in some instances, the man or women-only space should be for people who are genuinely born male or female, which I don't think is necessarily unreasonable, or at least I think there should be a few more requirements for almost permitting someone who says they're now the other gender to enter that place. Yeah, so this just really isn't addressing the point, I don't think. Where existing law is insufficient to protect women from harm, well, not cared about men being protected from harm, okay, just women. We should seek to address this in ways targeted at specific harmful behaviours, not at groups of people. But no, that's, again, you seem to be missing the point. Let's say Big Frank is actually a perfectly lovely person, but is 6'9", covered in hair, and he's a man as far as we can tell. Looks like a man. If Big Frank goes into the refuge, Big Frank might be the nicest person in the world and really supportive, but someone who's in that refuge because they've been attacked by a large man, quite similar to Big Frank, could quite understandably not want him sharing a bunk, or just being in close proximity to them. I don't know. You can't. There's no specific harmful behaviour that Big Frank is guilty of that we need to deal with. I mean, if Big Frank hits somebody in that refuge, then yeah, there's existing rules to do that, just as there would be anyone. Again, you're not addressing the point at all. Trans women have the same right to exist in women's spaces as any other woman. Well, no, they don't. Okay, I suppose again it depends what we mean by right. You're not saying legal right, you're not saying a natural right. You're saying it is morally right for trans people to exist in women's spaces just as it is any other woman. Not sure. To say otherwise is dehumanising. Good grief. Well, no, it isn't. I'm not saying, let's say that I don't think Big Frank should be allowed in the women's refuge. I'm not saying that is because Big Frank is not human. I'm simply saying that that is because Big Frank is not a woman as far as those other women in the refuge are concerned. That's not dehumanising. It's de-womaning. It's just it's a contention that this trans woman is not really a woman, or doesn't appear to be one, which is it's a difficult issue. We seem to be skirting over the issue again. As a question of basic human rights, we do not believe that advocacy of transphobic positions is a matter for friendly debate. Oh grief. Transphobia has no place in this party, either in the context of personal bullying and abuse or in the wider context of advocating positions which seek to eliminate the space for trans people to exist in society. I mean, let's just address that second bit because it just sounds ridiculous. Eliminate the space for trans people to exist in society. Like, let's create a vortex and make them get sucked into it. Is anyone who's saying that? But we do not believe that the advocacy of transphobic positions is a matter for friendly debate. Well, a transphobic position, as far as you're concerned, seems to just be not treating a trans person as if they were the sex or gender that they now say they are in all the circumstances. I should. And what did you say? Separate from society, using segregated facilities or denying them access to facilities. We keep coming back to the same thing. If I say that Big Frank shouldn't go into the refuge, I'm being transphobic, and there is no debate to be had on that. But there obviously is a debate to be had on that. Because what constitutes trans? What is a genuine trans person? We've got very little context left, very little of this open letter left, and we haven't addressed that at all. And yeah, we the undersigned stand shoulder to shoulder with our trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming friends, and that's it. So what is transphobia? I don't know. It is not giving the trans people the respect, the rights, or the access they want. In all cases, subject to what checks? It doesn't tell me. What has this letter said? Has it? Yeah, I'm coming back to my cynical expectation, which is essentially it just says, don't be unduly mean to trans people. Okay, I agree. But in a practical situation, what does that look like? No. No, this tells me nothing other than don't be mean to trans people. Don't think I'll be adding my name. Sorry.